Welcome to Portals of Perception and to Current Openings. What the world doesn't quite get yet, a conversation where David Price Francis and I explore what is opening as we endeavor to catch the current of this moment. Today we are embarking on a new wave of current openings. We call this new wave the Human Development Challenge, which builds on the predicament story we've been tracking. And we call this current openings number 11, the Human Development Challenge, the application Conundrum. David is a spiritual teacher and a transformation expert helping individuals and groups improve the quality of their lives and relationships. David, welcome.
Thank you, Aviv. Good to be with you.
Are we ready to embark on the next wave of current openings?
I would say so. I think we took a good deal of time inside the human predicament. I mean, we are still in the human predicament as a human race. But inside that, there are those who want to develop, who want to move from the exoteric into the mesoteric, into the esoteric, as you reminded us on the very first call. And I think to say with that, just a brief call over, exoteric is more to do with street level knowledge and connection. Mesoteric is more to do with, as an example, greater knowledge, but more at the level of the professional class. So learning to use knowledge like accountancy to earn a better living. Esoteric is to do with the core truths of the universe and coming into connection with those truths. So the Human Development Challenge in our research and talks is a lot about making our journey toward that esoteric core or esoteric center. And I'm very glad that we're heading in that direction inside the human predicament.
And in episode 10, we reflected on the Einstein brief, and he was an interesting guy because he obviously integrated the mesoteric and the esoteric permission to inquire into the universe and to come up with new ways of seeing difficult problems. And his brief was, as you offered earlier as we explored this journey, was that bring 95% of the focus to the problem, because that will enable you to unlock the 5% solution. So we are now hoping to find a way to distill and bring the predicament story fuel that we generated and distilled, not to perhaps directly get us to the 5% solution, but rather to build a pathway to get us into the district where several 5% solutions can be found. We call this pathway the Human Development Challenge. So there is a great utility and wisdom in this approach. As we know, most people, when they face a challenge, when they face a problem, they just want to solve the problem, sometimes obsessively. It's quite natural. I have trained myself to, instead of looking to find a solution, to become curious, to become generative about creating the pathway that will get me to the place, to the ecology where multiple solutions can find me. This is not merely a play with words, it is a difference in worldview, it is a difference in strategy, and I inside it, David, take the position that this is a creative and compassionate universe. It helps those who generatively look to serve life. And I find that I don't need to come up with all the solutions. What I need to do is to get into the generative ecology where multiple solutions are naturally arising. And what I'm proposing, that this is a shift in orientation. Instead of looking at solutions as a first principle, we are proposing that the ecology the process, the generative process and ecology where multiple solutions are present and in flow is the first principle. And that, in many ways, is what we have attempted to demonstrate through our dialogues. In healing world, in the healing space, you'll say that instead of working to cure the symptoms, we are working to encourage general well-being, general vitality, and let that vital force of life address whatever the need is. So this is another way of looking at the Einstein brief, and in some way it gets us into the application conundrum. So, and on the journey to the Human Development Challenge. So I know you may want to play some jazz with what I just said, but let me also frame the following question so you can make a bridge, which is, so where would you begin this reflective inquiry, which is what is unique about learning and what is it that's so unique about our capacity to learn? Because this is where we want to lead into some distinction between learning and application. So I begin by asking you, what's unique about learning and about our capacity to learn?
Gotcha. That's a great question. I think I'd start just back a little bit with the idea of, it's interesting in the legal world, they talk about due process, giving something the process it needs. It's kind of like getting in the territory before then searching for the exact, even kind of legal medicine to offer. And so we were in the territory to allow solutions to suggest themselves. And we had so many different potentials, but then what rang most true was this idea of the Human Development Challenge. And then we came up against the conundrum. Well, it starts with learning, but learning won't get you there. So we even spoke about learning inside the human predicament, because in many ways, learning can actually keep us asleep. Because if we focus on learning, and that is, and we're bringing into ourselves more and more academic knowledge without the application of that knowledge, then we never quite get into practice. And something about the journey from the mesoteric to the esoteric is very much going from knowledge, but then application of the knowledge, which brings what we call connection. The idea of connecting to particular energies, connecting to the forces, to take the current openings, the energetic current that allows us to take action. So learning on its own doesn't do it. I think of it, to refer back to a previous conversation we had, learning is like bringing in potatoes. Learning is like the warehouse is getting deliveries of potatoes. But then we need to take those potatoes, the learning that we've had, and create an assembly by which we apply that learning. And otherwise, we just get more and more stock, but without the ability to apply that stock. We can see that easily in the professional world, where someone may go to gather the theory of becoming a doctor, but then they go into what's called practice. And interestingly, they never stop practicing, because when you go to the doctor, you're going to see the doctor and go and meet their practice. So doctors have a practice, which means they're learning and applying at the same time. But they're not just sticking to the learning dynamic. So I think in a way, if learning was on a horizontal bar like this, application would take it into another kind of octave. It's like an octave change. And when it comes to the human speciality, well, nothing else on earth can decide to study something that isn't within its preset planetary program. Like, you never get a squirrel saying, how can I become a healer? You never get a rhinoceros saying, well, how can I study poetry? But you get humans, and we have universities to help do this. Interesting name, because it's meant to be of the universe. And inside the university, there might be 20,000 students, and there are maybe 2,000 different specialities and subspecialities, all engaged in learning by choice, which is an amazing human speciality. So we're able to choose to learn about particular dynamics, whether it's engineering or the English language or the French language or any of the, I think, 2,600 spoken languages on the planet at the moment. You know, it's incredible. You could have 2,000 people together. They've all learned different and speak a different language. It's just totally amazing. So we have this kaleidoscope of learning possibility. And a person can say, well, I really want to learn languages. And they might learn 16 different languages. The question then comes, how do they apply that knowledge?
Yeah.
How do they apply that learning? So there's this distinction, but the human speciality, a major part of it, is that ability to choose a certain kind of learning and then code ourselves with that knowledge, code our mental faculty, and in many ways code our feeling faculty as well.
So you brought this awareness, which we addressed when we explored the knowledge problem. When you talked about learning can put you to sleep, can make you numb, and what we addressed when we explored the knowledge problem was the idea that knowledge carries energetic potential, but that what we described as sclerotic classroom knowledge is more like ready packaged food that will not necessarily enliven your natural system. So it puts you to sleep rather than awakens you and alerts you and switches your systems on. And this becomes important in what we are looking to begin to explore in this wave that we call the Human Development Challenge, because the beginning of the challenge is to actually be awakened to the challenge and to, as you said, make a choice. Oh, I'm going to choose to embark on the inquiry of why are we humans here on this earth? What's the meaning and the purpose of life and other large questions? And I'm going to, by all means, read what the smartest philosophers and people from the beginning of time, how they answer the questions. But I'm not going to delegate that inquiry. I'm actually going to make it my personal inquiry and let that inquiry be a propelling force, a propelling energy in my life. So that's where we begin. And what I will offer by way of reflection about learning is that learning truly defines, in many ways, our sense of ourselves. It defines our humanness, the fact that we can learn, the fact that we do learn. Often if you ask somebody about their journey in life, they will actually reflect on some of the big things they've learned along their journey. So there is something about the capacity to assimilate information and assimilate experience in a way that will transform the way we see the world. And to, for a moment, take it to the even bigger picture, I propose that resembles, or that describes, the nature of the third Big Bang. So the first Big Bang was the emancipation of the universe into its expansion. The second Big Bang is the birthing of life and the tremendous diversity of life. And the third Big Bang is the birthing of consciousness, or an awareness that's aware of itself, an awareness that's conscious of itself. where we would very much describe that learning is its inner nature. So what's exciting for us about this, it says that this universe is a learning system. We are, right from the get-go, we show up in a bigger system that's a learning system. It has its learning, and what's exciting about it is a system that learns and applies. Now, as you just alluded to this, the question is whether we do the same, whether we learn and apply our learning. And that's partly where we are leading. So to just instantiate what we mean by the universe as a learning system and how it plays out, well, we addressed some of it when we did our deep dive into the planetary program. And I'll describe it today with the idea of the harvesting principle. So the harvesting principle is this idea that anything that the universe learns, anything the universe develops as a know-how becomes downloadable anywhere in the universe, because the universe runs an open source operating system. And which is a beautiful idea, because what it means is the universe is not proprietary. And in fact, it demonstrates that any capacity that got switched on is shared throughout the universe. It's a generous and compassionate universe, which for us is a fascinating realization, because it means that for the universe, what's economic and effective is one and the same with what's generous and compassionate. In other words, the economic calculus and the generosity, compassion evaluation are not a conflict. They are not a polarity. Actually, they are one and the same, which is something we ought to come back to again in the future, because it really means that when we are unlocking our universal potential, we are able to bring into alignment also the economic consideration and the generosity and compassion consideration. In reality, in life, often the two in the exoteric, that you reminded us is to do with street experience, street knowledge and street experience, they often these two considerations are actually in conflict. But what we are saying is that the universe likes to, once it develops something, to release it everywhere. And a simple example for a minute from technology world, and then I'll make the point back to the way the universe works, of what I'm attempting to describe with this idea of the harvesting principle. So most youngsters today will not know what an iPod is. To reveal something about our age, iPod was this little device you used to take to the gym to carry all the music with, so you could exercise in the gym or go for a run while you're listening to your music. Where is the iPod? The question is, well, there are two ways to tell the story. One way is to say the iPhone cannibalized the iPod. But another way to tell the story is that the touch knowledge, the touch capacity, the touch capability that Apple developed and innovated through the iPod enabled the iPhone and the iPad. That is the harvesting principle. So a next level of innovation uses some of the earlier technology that developed as a foundational, as a scaffold to enable that innovation. Well, it's very nice to see this in technology, but that is actually a universal patent, a universal idea, and a simple way to demonstrate that the first Big Bang enabled the second Big Bang, and both enable the third Big Bang of consciousness and awareness of awareness, is to consider that, well, so here is this fractal pattern that even when the universe, that first Big Bang, is the release, the exhale of the universe, which, by the way, presents a fascinating inquiry. If that was the exhale, that first Big Bang, what was the inhale that had taken place before the exhale? But that exhale, inhale, contract and expand, concentrate and disperse, this becomes a fractal, a pattern that's emerging in the first Big Bang that then is critical in enabling any appearance of organic life, where any digestive system and any breathing system and so on, that will become so critical for the emancipation of life. That know-how, that blueprint is already seeded in the first Big Bang. And when we talk about the third Big Bang, the emancipation of knowledge by way of consciousness and consciousness that's aware of itself, the neural network that bring the concentration of those neural cells as a facility, as a biological platform that enables awareness and consciousness, if you like, rests on an earlier scaffolds from the appearance of life. Because for life to appear from a prebiotic matter into biological life, there had to be a concentration of very vast composite of molecular ingredients to then catalyze the polymer action and so on and so forth, which is currently the theory of how life emerged. So what we are seeing, that the universe is a system that times and again establish a certain capability, which we described in the planetary program episode as the memory of the universe that then become accessible to anything and everything. Why it's so fascinating and important for us to consider is because, as you pointed on several occasions through our journey to this point with the human predicament story, we actually often use the higher system, the more sophisticated system, in a, shall we say, foolish or dysfunctional or sometimes destructive way. So we have a more sophisticated system that's used suboptimally, and yet the more foundational automated system is already in its, potentially in good health, in its optimal performance. And what we are seeking to invite in this inquiry about the human challenge, human development challenge, and the application conundrum, is we are inviting the process of opting in, self-electing, as you said, to recognize that for us, learning is awesome. We actually very much define ourselves by what we learn. The question is, do we remember to apply the learning, and are we as generative and as robust and as rigorous in the application of that learning? So I'd just offer that as the big picture before, and as a segue to landing back in the conundrum of the application of human learning.
All right. So that is big picture. So looking for a way inside that, and thinking to a question that you asked there, which is, when we say to someone, "What have you learned?" in their life journey, very rarely will they be remembering some theoretical knowledge. What they'll tend to come out with is something which was an actual sensation. Mm. I think there's in that sense, there's learning, which we tend to associate now with cerebral learning, so learning and referencing with our brain. But what really sticks and holds is more the education that we receive when we experience something through all five senses. So we actually have some kind of some external to internal or internal to external. It can be a moment of revelation when it's from the inside out. It can be a moment of shock or awe, just looking at whatever it is one's focusing on, and actually getting that sense of connection, as you say, to the universe, and then experiencing a feeling and a sensation that's working through all five senses. And that's where we tend to reference when we're actually looking for what have we learnt in our life. Those tend to be the live moments, almost like you're looking at a dark landscape and there's these points of light. People tend to refer to the points of light, the moment they met their partner, the moment a child was born, the moment that they almost fell off the mountain, but they managed to hold on and they had a near-death experience. Those kind of experiences reorientate a life. And it's a special kind of learning, which involves all of our energy centers, I like to refer to them as. So it's not only our thinking, but it's also our emotion, and it involves our physical being. We feel it in all parts. So that is, to me, being on that trace of application, because application involves more than a mental preoccupation. So application, take the doctor in practice, take the surgeon. There can be 7 years of theory, but then there's the moment of actually taking a scalpel and actually making an incision. And that is no longer theory, that is application. And the application is in its baby stage. Mm. Maybe 7 years of an assembly to do with mostly, we can't say passive learning, because it does involve paying attention. And I love that expression, because we pay attention. We pay to receive. So we pay attention and we receive more than if we sit there, say, listening to that iPods, with our ears, and someone's talking, but we're not actually hearing them. Well, then we don't receive it. So, but when we pay attention, it's like our ears open and in comes the impressions, and we gather the necessary beginning assembly. I like to think of it as in formation. It's something that hasn't formed yet. It's literally in formation. And then we start to take the second stage, if we do. Many a professor is a professor who has lots to profess and never gets to the application stage. That's the whole idea of being in the ivory tower of learning, the academic tower, where there's beautiful theories about economics or about whatever the topic may be. But it's the application by which it's discovered. Does it work? What's the interaction with the universe? What feedback then comes back? And I think the example of the iPhone is very interesting, because it wasn't envisioned when it began that there would be these things called applications. Applications has become a very big word. And if you don't have the application, if I want to send money to you, let's say through your iPhone, and I want to send it through a particular, I'll just call it Cash Go, just making up a name. And I've got the application, but you don't. I can't send it to you because you can't receive it. So the application, to me, is the next step in the journey. It doesn't get you all the way. Mm-hmm. But it gets you to the point where you can work with something, which happens, and I think this is part of the conundrum, because when we focus on something and literally apply it ourselves, so the way we create an application is by applying our five senses, applying our full human faculty to something. We're then going to get things like intuitive moments, intuitive little glimpses of understanding, because all of our many parts get to work on what it is that we're applying ourselves into. And that is much more intense than learning. Learning provides the basic information. Then we have a formation, which we're calling we have our beginnings of an application. But the way we grow and develop that is by applying ourselves into it. So we become the trigger. We've got that amazing inside the universe. we get to create our own Big Bang, as you call it. So our own third level. It's in our hands, but if we choose to stay passive and, let's say, spend our life doing things that other people, that conformity tells us to do, getting a certain level of job, coming home, watching TV, staying within the conformity, then we're unlikely to create applications of any higher merit, which is a lot to do with the esoteric.
So let me retrace some of the themes you're offering. The first distinction you made was between, again, sterile learning, say regurgitating a piece of text from a book you read because you need to have it ready for tomorrow morning for an exam, to a multi-sensory, potentially 5 senses experience. When you are describing that kind of learning, you're truly identifying learning as an energetic instigation. Something occurred that catalyzed an experience from which we say you learn. There is an energetic dimension to that experience, and it is that becomes sometimes searing and etching all the way down to every cell, because something about that experience was so powerful and unique. So that's the first thing, first distinction you made. And then you said, well, it's not enough. You need to take that input, that energetic instigation, and apply yourself to it. And it's through the application, which may involve mental, may involve inquiry of whatever it is you're looking to solve by way of challenges outside of you, around you, or may involve introspective kind of inquiry. The point is, you move from, if you like, just catching the wind of whatever is happening in the environment to, oh no, I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to apply myself in a way that will make a difference. And the third distinction you made through the idea of applications, apps on the smartphone, is for it to actually communicate with the environment, there has to be what is called interoperability. So the two ends of the transaction, the two ends of that loop need to be wired such that the application can work. And we could say, whether in the domain of the law or the domain of medicine or the domain of human development or the domain of art and music, if you want to do something, if you want to apply yourself, you will need to develop both the mesoteric tool set that will likely enable you to operate in that domain, and then you'll be looking to see whether you can be inspired. So the inspiration in that sense is where there is that energetic input, sometimes esoteric, sometimes not, but potentially is not just, again, something that's passing in the district, but is to do with your unique inquiry, your unique passion, and that then works through you. And again, for it to work through you, you'd have to apply yourself. So we hear the greatest actors, the greatest authors, the greatest people in any field, they'll get up in the morning and apply themselves to the domain they're developing, so to speak. They will describe to you, I'm showing up in the office. It's not just that the muse will work through me, I need to show up. So the muse now, it's going to work through me because I'm there and I make demand upon it. And that is the kind of application that you are describing, where there is not just happenstance, but I take my learning with significance, with a precious attention, such that it leads to results.
And one has the awareness But then there's the next, there's going deeper with it, like trying to get into the meaning of what it is that one has become aware of. There's a marvelous story. I call it the Velcro moment. There was, we've all been for walks in the wood, I'm sure, and you go for a walk in the wood, and I was in Tennessee at the time, and you get covered in what are called burrs. So B-U-R-R, they're these bits of organic life that they've learned to stick on things like cow hides or sheep's wool. So they get carried over distance and then they get shaken off, and they've managed to transport to a new territory. So it's part of the design system of organic life and the way that the seed of that particular plant propagates itself and it travels. It can't travel itself, but it can travel on a sheep's back. But anyway, so you can come in from a walk and you look down, you go, oh, I've got all these burrs, and the person takes them off. The Velcro moment was when a man went, hang on, how does it do that? And then actually took one of those burrs and examined the structure and found that it was made of all these little hooks and eyes. And he developed Velcro. Velcro developed from studying a burr. But how many of us have had burrs but not had the Velcro moment? You know, a large part of the human race has probably had the experience, but who applied themselves, who had the application to look deeper and go, well, what does this mean? How does this work? What's the significance of this in the universe? Because this is part of universal design turning up in this little this small part of organic life, and then from that application, we now, anytime you Velcro something to something else, it's based on the technology of how that burr attached itself to a sheep, and I think that's a very telling story. We have how many things are in front of our nose that we don't apply ourselves and see the deeper significance. And if we look at our human system, you know, it's like I'm doing a course on blood work at the moment and how to understand it. And the more I learn about what's inside that amazing liquid called blood, and pay attention into it, the more, one thing it has produced as a byproduct is greater awe about our human system. I don't have a direct application of what to do with blood or about blood, but my appreciation of the human design has amplified again with greater knowledge.
So the Velcro story is a beautiful one, because what you described there is somebody who allowed themselves to be stimulated and provoked by their natural curiosity. Now, as you know, in the other part of my life, what I've been doing for the last 2 decades is I've been leading senior leadership teams through strategy and innovation protocols and workshops to help some of the most innovative companies in the world develop their next breakthrough ideas. And some of the techniques we use in workshops like that is to bring natural observations from different fields and certainly from the natural worlds, and to create impossible compositions of unrelated domains to provoke those kind of non-linear leaping ideas. And it's true in business innovation. It certainly is true in all other spaces of art and philosophy and so on and so forth, where somebody would often hold a question, hold an inquiry, is what I describe sometimes as a permanent line inquiry. It's like it's working in their semi and unconscious processes even when they are not thinking about it. So they may be watching a movie, they may be reading a book, they may be doing anything. But when there is a stimuli, when there is something that carries an energetic potential, a connective possibility for new insight about the bigger inquiry of their life, such as the story that you shared about Was it Tesla, the story that you shared, and how he came up with that solution? And it's in one of our earlier episodes.
Yes.
So that is an example of true human application. And what we're seeing is that time and again, what is pushing the human envelope in terms of its knowledge, its capacity to solve problems, is that sense of application. So I ask the following question then: what is the application conundrum? And where I begin the answer is that what we are saying is that the application conundrum, the learning application conundrum, is the conundrum of life. Because so in my mystical eye, in your Velcro story, what do you call this? Bear, you said?
Yeah, burr. Yeah, a burr. B-U-R-R.
Yeah, those were there waiting from the beginning of time for human intelligence to inquire into their technology such that they can be harvested, that's the harvesting principle, into human solution to solve problems that we face. So if I slow down what I just said, the argument or the position I'm taking is that life gives rise to learning possibilities, and then as these ferment, as the learning ferments, those ideas, those inspirations, those inquiries, as they ferment, as possibilities ferment, life wants its return, because life is making an investment in the universe and in us, and it wants to have its return. The universe, as we said again in the planetary program conversation, is highly economic. It forever makes investments in us, and it wants to see the yield of that investment. In other words, the cycle of life is from potential to actualization, from intent to realization, from learning to application. What is learning without application? It's an incomplete journey, and what we are proposing today is that learning is how life inseminates possibilities. It's the invitation for us humans to engage with this idea that we are alive here. We've been given the gift of life to enter the application theater, not just play with the apps on our smartphones, but actually take life as the theater of application. That is the invitation we are making in the application conundrum.
Yes, and that exactly correlates into the human development challenge, because a squirrel doesn't face a squirrel development challenge. A squirrel simply faces growing up inside its planetary program and being a squirrel. If we did not have the amazing capacity of higher faculties and the ability to choose, we would simply fulfill that planetary program. So there's built into the human development challenge is the fact that there are 8 billion people on the planet, and every single person is developing into something. Now, by the process of learning, by the process of application, to whatever degree. The question is, and this will be a direct question to each person, to myself, to you, to each person listening, are you developing into what you want to develop into? Do you actually like what you're developing into? Do you want to be what you're developing into? Because if we don't develop ourselves, if we don't apply ourselves, something else will run its programs in us. So the advertisers are just standing by, ready to run their programs and have you choose according to what they want you to do, not according to what you may want to do. So if we don't apply ourselves, something else installs its own applications through the process of causing us to learn information that's not actually designed to help us or facilitate us or bring us into a journey of a higher development, but it's actually designed to help them get the result they want. And we are an incidental byproduct.
You're saying there is no void. You're saying there is no void. You either choose yourself by what you elect into, or the everything else around you that has its agenda, often its commercial agenda, where you may be the product yourself, both the product and the market, it will choose for you. So you really got to be awakened, got to be alerted to this idea of what it is that you choose to apply yourself to. Now, so let me ask this question, David, because you are a master of words, and the word we are focusing on today is application. And application has more than one meaning, and you already centered our attention on the idea of app, by way of an app on a smartphone, and how that means there has to be an interoperability. The app uses the operating system, and to connect with somebody else, that other person need to have that app as well. So that's one meaning of the word application. There is also this other meaning in the word application, which is to petition, to request, to appeal. And it strikes me that this meaning of the word application is describing the petitional surge, and that what it describes is the surge of the first half of application. It's the quest, the yearning, and that then there is another half, which is what you have attempted now to describe, which is the effort to produce an outcome, or the work to apply. So another way of using the word application, to apply substance on something. So where do you put, I see here a loop, a complete loop, where the first half of application is making the petition, the request. The second half of which is more what we described in the idea of learning. And the second part is potentially describing application as a substantiation, concretization, the living actualization. How do you map those different meanings of the word application?
Well, I think that all structures, human structures, are based in their origination on the laws of the universe. So as you said about the universe, and it has definite laws, it has definite preset codes, ways of going on, ways of being, that we didn't make ourselves, but like with that example of the burr, it's finding what's already there. We discover things, we take the cover off things. I like to look at the fact that we are responsive. If you ask a painter to paint with a color that doesn't exist, the painter can't do it. But the painter can certainly take all ranges of colors that do exist and mix them in new combinations. That's the human inventiveness in that sense. So the reason I say that is, let's say someone is applying to a university. That's quite a common example. So we have something named after the universe, and someone wants to go into what they call higher education. They're not applying for lower education. Right? A certain level of education is like free, it's supplied. Somebody has to pay for it, but it's not necessarily thought about so much. But to go into higher education, well, you need to make an application. If you don't apply, no one's going to turn up on the street and say, we've selected you for no reason. You're the random person number 1,000,002 that's walked through that door, so you're now invited to come to this university. Doesn't work that way. And what goes on the application form? Not only what you've learned, what goes on the application form is how have you applied yourself in your life up to this point? And then how you've applied yourself, and therefore the results that you have, example, examination results, or leading a choir, or rowing a boat, whatever it may be. But the screening process, so looking at it from an external viewpoint, there's, say, 10,000 applications go into a university, And if we thought of it impersonally, there's a screening process, almost like a barcode in a supermarket. It screens over and it looks to pick the, let's say, 500 applications that have got the greatest proof or evidence of a person who can apply themselves. And then those are the people who are given entry. Now, it doesn't guarantee how they'll be, but they're trying to ensure that the so-called application process is made so it's the people who have applied themselves the most and have got the highest level of so-called qualifications that can enter. So I know earlier, looking at the idea of the universe, well, if we just took it back into its origin, doesn't it suggest that according to how we've applied ourselves in our life, we create certain qualities, which is what gives the idea of qualifications. We qualify for what next. And I look at religious systems in the world, and many of them are built on the idea of creating merit, which is by application, and becoming qualified to enter into a higher domain of some kind. So somewhere in there's a human development challenge that says there's there's action we need to take. It's not enough just to sit back and go, everything is going to be okay. I don't really need to apply myself because, let's take the example in certain New Age teaching, I'm going to reincarnate anyway, so never mind, I'll try harder in my next life. Well, I wouldn't take that risk. I would look at this like the human development challenge is for this life. And the application conundrum is if we want to apply to go into any kind of higher connection, or go from mesoteric to esoteric, or go from this planetary life to a so-called better life that people mostly do hope for, that it's necessary to apply ourselves so that we qualify. That comes back on us.
So there is implicit in the idea of application then some result to be produced as a result of the application, whether it's an interior result in this life or another lifetime. Yes. To quote Russell Crowe in Gladiator, I will have my revenge in one life or another, this life or another, or produce results outside of yourself. So this is very much the invitation of application, and therefore we can contemplate the idea of apply your thoughts, apply your mind, apply your thinking capacities, your creative capacities, apply your heart, your passion, your emotion, your energy, and apply your physical, biological force, apply your hands to create results. You may choose to apply your whole person and bring every cell of you, every part of you to a point of focus as part of how you apply the gift that you are here now at this time. And that is part of what we are inviting everyone to contemplate as we embark on the human development challenge. What is it that you care very much about, that you would want to apply yourself to? Because what we are saying is that the application conundrum is about how do we choose to use the gift of life to create whatever results, whatever outcomes we choose to create. In other words, how do we choose to apply ourselves to shape the universe while we're being shaped by the universe in this window of time we call life?
Yes. And waking up to having the awareness that we have the permission to choose the application that we make, how we apply ourselves internally and externally.
And so implicit in this, we are proposing that not every learning leads to application. There are many starter learnings that get aborted halfway.
Yes. If you'd met me when I was 14, I was all intent on being a professional cricketer. And I left that behind when I was like 16. But at that time, that was like, oh, that's the thing to be. That's where the joy is. That's where the passion is. But that was not the long-term reality of a developing human, developing life in me. It turned out to be temporary, and so that was relegated. Yeah.
And as you said, very much the line you have chosen to focus on, the way it expresses itself, one of the ways application is expressed is in this idea of practice. So I use the term living practice. I also use the term practice application. Why must we practice our application? Why indeed is that so important? What else over and above what we have already said you'd offer as to why it is so critical to demonstrate to ourselves that what we have chosen to apply ourselves to, we do so through the life of practice?
Well, if we are to become something, then I think of it as a combination. You touched on it earlier, the way of the head, the mental, the heart, the emotional, and the hands, the actual hands-on work. So it's the way of the three H's of the human into combination. And when we practice something, we build a density. So it's like trying to find the right language to explain it, but we build a density. If you get someone who practices tennis 3 hours a day, then they go on to, say, the tennis court, they meet someone who's practiced tennis twice in their life. There's going to be, they both know the rules of tennis. They both know, how the scoring is done. They've got the theory of it, but the person who's done it 10,000 times, they have the application, they have the practice. And the other person is only just beginning. They've got the learning, but they don't have the application. And it's the density of experience we build over time. And when you take the word density, I do like working, as you said, with language and looking at the inner combinations. I look at a word and see that each letter has its particular energetic potency or power. When you change the letters around, you find another word which is like a molecular compound. It's just slightly different but rearranged. So it's the density of our experiences that determines our destiny. Yeah. So the density of what we build by our practice, that creates our destination or our destiny. Because there is a law in the universe that, well, we know of it as the law of attraction. I think of it as the law of everything returns to the source of its arising. So if we build an energy field, let's say, that would be vibrating with Mars energy, then we're going to have a big attraction to anything to do with Mars. If we're building an attraction to, if we build something filled with more Venus energy, we could take colors, one being more red, one being more blue. They showed this in the film Avatar. You've got your red machine, you've got your machine world, and then you've got your blue people. The reason I'm mentioning any of that is that we build a density of experience, and learning will give us a certain amount. Like we might get 1 amp of power, let's say, with learning. When we put it into practice and we engage our entire system and we have sensations go with it, it goes from 1 amp, let's say, to 20 amps. It becomes much more potent. The surgeon is always going to remember that first cut with the scalpel. So the density of experience, we start to then, our life gets angled towards a particular destiny. And it's the ability to choose that.
Yeah.
Which is life turns people out to be what they turn out to be.
You are
education, but this is actually choosing it from the inside out for oneself.
You're really distilling the message from Marcus Aurelius all the way to the Buddha and Emerson and many other wise people in between, in the idea of you become what you think about, by which The implication is not if you think all day long about horses, you'll become a horse. No, you won't become a horse. But what you will do is you will tune your sensitivity. You will become much better at reading horses and reading the horse's energy. You'll become more clairvoyant and sensitized to know what the horse will feel and how they respond. And you'll read the vital signs of the horse and so on and so forth. So in that sense, you will become proficient in that domain of knowledge because you have applied yourself to it. So in other words, you're proposing to potentially, dare we update, you become what you think about, to say, well, you truly become what you apply yourself to. You truly are becoming those inquiries, those pursuits, those endeavors that you have decided to apply yourself to, head, heart, and hands, with passion, with energy, with devotion, because you direct the circuitries of your life in that direction, and you build, as you say, density, and so that energy becomes expressed and manifested in the practical physical results of your life.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's a very excellent updating, because there's more than thinking. Yeah, there's thinking, there's feeling. It's the application of the whole person.
So how about if we try to bring this to more or less to a last final round with this idea of a practice that may help us lead from learning to application. So we demonstrated throughout our conversations how we have taken these three sisters, the exoteric, the mesoteric, and the esoteric, and time and again, we would come back to this way of looking at the world. What have we demonstrated? We've demonstrated that because we practice these lands of seeing the world in this way, we build, as you say, density of that perspective, such that the yield begins to find us. The next day, you no longer need to ask. You look at something and it presents to you these three dimensions that are emergent in it. So if I was to try to reverse engineer the process and the practice to show what might be the way from learning to application, I'd say that step one, you internalize a principle, you internalize the natural law. In this case, we internalized that anything we look at, we may choose to see the exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric. So you look to internalize, to simply understand the principle you're looking at. Step two, you look to, after you internalize the second eye, you look to instantiate, and do so by collecting many other expressions, many other examples of how and where this principle, this law would manifest. Right. Step three, now that you have gathered many examples around you, you look to now take those examples and, third eye, innervate that principle in yourself, bring it to life, activate it, so you're no longer seeing it from the outside of you. You begin to hologrammically experience it everywhere. As you said, it's not merely thinking, it's the hologramic actuality of life. In everything there is the way to unlock and see the esoteric contained and surrounded by the mesoteric, surrounded by the exoteric. So internalize, step one, instantiate, step two, innovate and bring to life, step three. Step four, inspire mastery. Take that kind of activated principle and let it now become the lead. Rather than you lead it, you let that working principle become the mastery that guides you through life. So you are no longer developing, in this case, the principle. You have become the embodied application of the principles. It now works through you and leads you, and it leads you, and therefore you can say you have become an inspired mastery of the expression of that principle. That is the way I will try to decode and reverse engineer the very process we're demonstrating through our dialogues.
Nicely done. Yes. And I would recommend one question as a starter, which would be the question, what do I really want? And then to stay with the question. That is, in terms of that human development challenge, the application conundrum, I think a good example is you can go to a gym and you can learn how the machines work. You can walk around and you can learn about how the dumbbells function and how the backward row functions. And you can walk around the gym and you can learn how things work. But it doesn't do anything to you until you actually go and actually push those weights and meet the resistance of what it's actually like. And that's also part of the conundrum. One can, from learning, think, oh yeah, I can do that. But until one actually applies oneself, one doesn't know. And the way those two things relate is in the human development challenge, what do I want is a question to be asking and re-asking and re-asking, kind of like those weights, so that you can get deeper, because you can stop at, well, what I really want is a croissant. It's like that would be exoteric. Or what do I really want is but when it comes to, well, with the meaning and the purpose and how do I want to apply this life I've been given in a way, how do I want to apply it? And then we come to those 4 practical application steps, which will help in that process. Without application, we're tourists. Imagine you live 70 years on the planet and you kind of conclude and you think, oh, I was a tourist. I never really got involved. I didn't really apply myself. Oops.
So we will have to come back to this, David, because it's easy to imagine somebody hearing your question in the way you frame the what do you want, and you say, okay, I mean something that's a little deeper than I want strawberry ice cream now. Yep. And they will say, well, I want to be successful. I want to make a lot of money. I want to have love in my life. I want to live a life that's surrounded with people that love me and respect me, all of which are good answers. Yep. And you are proposing, can you take that and go even deeper as to why in each of those, and is there more? And you are proposing that's another lane, another parallel track to explore the human development challenge, to drive deeper and deeper and deeper in your understanding of what you want, because clearly as you go through life, you may deepen that inquiry all the way to saying, well, I want to understand what's the meaning of being alive, and what's the meaning of being alive right now, this time of change on the planet. And I want to fully embrace the significance of human life through this time of evolutionary change. And I want to, inside it, find a way to access not just the planetary transitory nature, because we are in the flesh. One day, this will return to the ground. And is this the end of all things? Or is there a property of consciousness, a consciousness that's conscious of itself, as we said, an expression of the third Big Bang that is emergent, an emergent property of every life? Where would that be when this physical flesh returns to the ground? And is there a way for me in this transitory window that we call planetary life, is there a way for me to access the universal nature of a life? And if yes, what might be the way to embark on that journey? Now that is where how I journey today with the question, what do you want? But then I've been inside that inquiry consciously for 44 years, maybe more. In other ways, 50 some years, because in some way it emerged when I was 11, 12. Okay, but we don't want to leave people coming on this journey with us. Just go and ask yourself what you want. We're going to do some hand holding along the journey of the human development challenge. And today, we're simply inviting you to take any one idea from this conversation or any of the previous 10 and say, okay, well, David and Aviv articulated here something that's of interest and is valuable for me as a way of, I want to apply myself to this way of seeing, to this way of being, to this way of engaging with life. And then look to internalize the way of it, look to instantiate it by seeing where else around you can you see the expression of it. Look to bring it to life, to innervate it as part of you. Look to allow that principle become an inspired mastery in your life. And that is the way to journey from learning to application. How about that as a landing place for us today?
That's a good place to land, Aviv. Let's land there, and we'll take off again in the next current opening.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Aviv. Great to be with you. Bye for now.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.